When I was a freshman at Davidson in November of 2018, a student was outed as being a neo-Nazi. She was doxxed by I think, leftist organization in North Carolina that basically put screenshots of a bunch of tweets from an anonymous Twitter account that she had that were literally spouting neo-Nazi bullshit. I remember a lot of things from that moment because in a lot of ways it was this very pivotal moment of radicalization for me on campus, and also showed a lot of things that, like, now looking back as a senior in November of my senior year, I can see patterns that have continued to repeat on this campus when it comes to how student organizers who are especially like women of color or trans people of color, or even more especially Black women, are treated on this campus, and what activism has looked like largely. Immediately after the whole doxing thing, I think that night the BSC house was open to everyone who wanted to come, mostly students of color, so that we could all just sit and process what had happened. There were 5 Black femmes who were all upperclassmen at the time, juniors and seniors, who essentially held a circle for people to just be able to like check in and like see how we were all doing, and where like know that we have community and like process things together. And they put a lot of effort into this idea of like a space that's full of care and full of checking in on each other as this basis of like a response to what had happened. Because a lot of students of color, especially as a first year, like, we were traumatized, and I think for a lot of people that like burst their idea of what Davidson was. For white students, that idea came back. For white students, like, that didn't really do anything. I think they were upset for about a week and then moved on. But I think for a lot of students in my year, like, that was our first moment of like, oh fuck, Davidson sucks, but Davidson is also like full of violent people that can be a very scary place. Yeah. So out of this space at the BSC for people to just check in and build community, there were a lot of different ideas that came about. One of them, which was led by the same Black femmes, the same Black femmes, was to revive this BSC Project 87, which was created in 1984 by a bunch of Black student activists, most notably Janet Stovall, who is currently on the Board of Trustees, that had a list of demands for the school to complete by 1987. Some of the demands were that they wanted to have Black counselors and Black administrators. Others were that they wanted to have the student and faculty ratio of Black students match the like percentage of Black like people in America, and other things like that. But by 2018, I think maybe 2 of those demands have been fulfilled. Maybe 1, I'm not even really sure. And so there's this idea that we should like dig back into the archives to look at what had already happened and build on top of that. And so that's how Revive Project 87 happened. And through that, we were able to like, now we have like 2 Black femme counselors, and like there are more Black deans, although Black deans are a whole issue unto themselves, as deans of color overwhelmingly are horrible at Davidson, as are all administrators at Davidson. But anyway, so that was one of the projects that came about. In general, it was this whole like flashpoint moment where a bunch of projects to better things for students of color at Davidson started happening. because after the neo-Nazi student was outed and we didn't know what Davidson's response was going to be, there was this huge moment of crisis and urgency. And the way that Davidson works is that you have to take every moment of crisis and urgency and like build on it as soon as you can and start going as fast as you can. And you can't take time to take care of yourself because you have to play up the optics of what the administration thinks and of what the white students are going to do. This was something that I found especially in what happened when the Black femmes created this like space for students of color and to care and check in, and took their time to like really think about like what to do with Project 87. And the Jewish students also like started meeting and thinking about things like trying to get a campaign going for Jewish studies. This also eventually led to the Asian American Initiative, out of meetings that Asian students had on campus to about like what the Asian community was feeling. But on, I would say, night 2, after the student was outed, a bunch of random like white students met at F, and a lot of them were white leftists, and they decided that they were going to throw a giant protest in the Union atrium about the neo-Nazi student being outed and about how shitty Davidson was, without really consulting students of color. And they did that. They did exactly that. They threw a giant protest in the Union atrium. A bunch of white students came. A lot of other students came too, but a lot of white students came. Carol Quillen was there. People spoke out. I remember very distinctly like 4 or 5 white people who spoke out about the whole situation. And in general, it was this huge, flashy moment that was completely co-opted by white leftists who were trying to make a point. And who then, after that day, did not really put any more effort into actual solid organizing strategies that meant that they would have to continue to do work after a week of just like optics, essentially. Yeah, that was what that week was like. It looked like me finally realizing the depth of how shitty Davidson was, not only because it was just a student who was outed, but because we were able to see that, like, not only because it was a student, it looked like me finally seeing the depth of Davidson's shittiness, not only because there was a student who's outed as a neo-Nazi, but also because that was a moment when I came into greater community with older students of color, and we got to see that a lot of them were saying that this was just the same thing that happens over and over again in a cyclical pattern. There's some breaking point about racial issues on this campus, mostly in the fall. Everyone has a huge crisis moment about it. White people get really upset, but only remember it for about a week, and students of color try to rally around it. And I think, you know, things sometimes get off the ground because of it, but other times things fall apart, and it repeats at least once a year. And so that was when I was like, oh fuck, this is something that just really shows like the depth of how horrible Davidson is, because this happens all the time. And then the reaction to it with the white students and the giant flashy protest, and then like all of the co-opting of it, that really showed me what Davidson is truly like. And yeah, I think in that moment I was really sad and really angry, but I also was in community with a bunch of upper class like women of color who I wouldn't have been in community with otherwise. And for that I'm truly, truly grateful, because out of that horrible moment came this huge like moment of like radicalization for me as a little liberal baby coming onto campus. And that has led to a lot of how I understand organizing to be at Davidson, which is that there are these endless patterns of like students trying to do something, it not getting enough momentum, or it failing, and or administration saying yes to it but then waiting students out as they graduate. And there's this like historical amnesia on this campus when it comes to anything student activism related, that is really horrible, and that is something that I've tried really hard to break. But we'll see. At least out of it we got Revive Project 87 and the Jewish Studies Working Group and the Asian American Initiative, so that's something.